Hello to everyone and welcome. I thought I would just put this slide up to help you realize if you're in the right place or not. and it's just a wonderful opportunity for us to kind of reconnect after the WBECS talk and give you an opportunity to follow up any questions you had or any thoughts you had. And we can spend a little bit at the end of our session today kind of talking about what we do at the Moment Institute. So now that you've kind of organized yourself to be here, I'm actually going to take these slides down so that we can actually just see each other. Yeah, so welcome. We have our ever wonderful Stephanie Morrison is with us this morning as a co-host for us to help us kind of navigate all the logistics of this. And we're going to spend the first half to 2/3 of the session just seeing what questions you have, what thoughts you have, and then we'll spend the last 20 minutes or so talking about what it is that we actually do. So I'm just really curious about what brought you here today, and particularly, was there something that intrigued you or that you appreciated about the WBECS session that called you to kind of want to come be with us here today? And you're welcome to just raise your hand. We're a small enough group, we can see you, or if you want to, if you prefer to write, you can put that in the chat box. And Stephanie will track that for us. Yes, Indy.
So I think the magic words for me were scaffolding structured emergence.
Okay.
I'm relatively new to coaching, but I spend a lot of time in some other fields where I've been very interested in emergence and scaffolding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Lisa.
Yes, good morning. Hi, everyone. And thank you again for offering this time together. What struck me most is that I'm in the process for my PCC certification through ICF. And frankly, I'm really struggling with this kind of, I feel, false sense of structure that's required for certification versus what my clients really need. And you articulated what they need beautifully, but it bumps up against that kind of artificial structure that I'm uncomfortable with. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, we'll come back around and talk about that in a minute. How about for others?
Hi, David. I was just wondering how you felt being back on the WBECS platform.
That's eerily analogous to Lisa's question about ICF. It was wonderful. It was, I think one of the things that's a gift in life is when you get to do things over time, because then it gives you markers to track how far you've come. And oftentimes, otherwise, it just kind of all blurs together. And so I took a break from WBECS for a couple of years. And so it was wonderful. There's Margaret. To be invited back. And it was just really eye-opening to me how far I've come since I did my first one, I think 7 years ago, which sort of kicked off that in a whole journey. And what I appreciated most was I felt that I could be much clearer and more brave, I think, than I was before. The messages were similar to what I've shared in the past, the messages I've shared for decades, but I felt, I just felt like I was sort of like cutting through the fog a bit and just saying what felt important for me to say. So I was grateful for that. Yeah.
Great. So just as a back, I mean, I came across you in 2016 or 2017 that led to a retreat in Amsterdam, and looking forward to the retreat this weekend in Bath. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Lovely roundabout park.
You're welcome. Yeah, it is. And
Carolyn has congratulated you on your multitasking and your broader coaching, sharing with the broader coaching community. Yeah. Oh, Leia's asking if there's going to be access to last week's presentation.
It may still be on the website for WBECS. It should still, it's down now. I know that they had a little time window.
Yes.
So I can't help with that because I don't have a copy of that video either. But maybe if you wrote them, they might be kind, and who knows. Right, and I'm curious about if there's questions you brought today, things that you're curious about. So we already have one about how do we navigate the tension between the ICF requirements and what I was sharing in terms of what clients I think actually need. But are there other questions that you brought with you today?
Hi.
Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, this is Debbie. I was really intrigued with this idea of building scaffolding for my client and frankly for myself too. But the picture that came into my mind was the difference between the corporate ladder where you're just only climbing up, and this idea of the scaffolding gives so much more support and security and ability to move side to side and be much more flexible. So I just, that really resonated with me, and trying to figure out how do I continue to help my clients build that scaffolding that will really support them going forward.
Okay, great, good question.
We have a post from Karen. Karen, did you want to share, or would you like me to read out? I can read out.
Sure, thank you. I think you had made a comment about helping our partners in coaching to activate their inner healer. And that was very intriguing to me.
Okay. All right.
David, I was impressed with the, I've always been impressed with the two-dimensional flatness of ICF. It feels really simple, and I know that's appealing to some people and perhaps a goal for them as an organization. But you brought about a multidimensionality to the fore, and I'm obviously projecting, but it felt like there was a sigh of relief that now we're moving into another time in coaching where we're aware of the depth, and we're not going to try to pretend it's not there. But that's something that you bring to this enterprise that I've appreciated from my very beginnings with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Tanya, you posted. Would you like to share?
I'm in a good morning, everyone, or whatever time it is for you. I'm just starting a coaching program in transformational coaching, and want to, as several other people have suggested, not follow a prescribed routine in the coaching process. And I'm just interested in that and how I can develop that.
Okay, great.
And Elizabeth, would you like to go? Your hand's up.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us today, David. I was really interested in exploring a little bit more your comments about the shift from individuals to ecosystems. I'm coming out of the corporate environment, and I absolutely resonate with the idea that, you can try and support the individual to change, but if the culture that they go back into isn't changing along with them, right, that oftentimes that's a recipe for failure rather than success. I'm interested to hear a bit more about your thinking there.
Okay, great. All right.
I think someone else was starting to speak.
Yeah, Sigrid.
Sigrid.
You talked about everything we need is right in front of us, and I tend to go looking everywhere else and thinking I don't have enough. And one comment I wanted to make, I live in New Mexico, and Ghost Ranch is one of my favorite places. So when you put that picture up there, I thought, yes, beauty.
Yes, I'll be back there again in October. So
it's a good time. It's a little hot now. It's a little hot right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
David, maybe one I'd like to add is near the end of your comment, you were talking about, the time is now to, commit without knowing enough, commence without feeling, create without waiting. And somebody early on, I've forgot who spoke about scaffolding. And so that was for the coachee. What scaffolding do coaches need themselves going forward? How can we let ourselves be the feather falling?
Yeah. Good. Well, let me just pull some thoughts together on these questions, and then we'll see what you think about them, and we can have a little discussion here. So let me start with your question, Colin, because it leads right into the dreaded ICF question. So for me, I'm not, just personally, I'm not a huge joiner. I don't fit in easily in boxes, and I've been tried to be put in boxes all my life, and I've resisted that. So I just make up my own boxes, or life without boxes. But I think humans have sort of two significant drivers. One is that our deepest core is belonging. And so ICF for some people provides a sense of belonging. And for many of us who are not drawn to ICF, sometimes it's difficult to have that sense of belonging as we're on our journey in our own life and work, but also in terms of supporting our practice. So a lot of what we do at the Institute is really focus on community. But the other sort of desire people have, or driver, is to be able to create, to contribute, to put ourselves out there. And this is where I think ICF really struggles. Matter of fact, they keep doubling down and making it more rigid as opposed to more adaptive, because that's their business model and that's what they do well. And I've supported ICF for years in terms of doing free talks, and I'm just finished a report with them on the use of artificial intelligence in coaching. So it's the world is a better place when they do well. So I keep nudging them to try to do a little bit better. So for me, it's like, anything, most of the people that have contributed the greatest to fields of music, art, learned the basics and then left the rest behind and charted some path for themselves. So as I shared on the forum for the talk, if having an ICF membership is valuable to you personally or professionally, then do whatever it takes to fulfill that. But just recognize it's for that purpose. It may have absolutely nothing to do with your quality as a coach, or your future as a coach, or your development as a coach. It's a game to play that, if it serves you, which it does serve many people, so that's fine. But don't expect it to be the container in which you evolve as a coach, frankly. Use it as if you've had a job, the things you have to do to keep your job, right? The things that you may not choose on your own, like sitting on committees, or I'm looking at Bradley, sitting on committees, filling out forms, going to pointless meetings. There's sort of just a hygienic piece of anything that we do in our life that has maintenance functions for the systems in which we work. And I look at ICF that way. And to your question, Colin, I feel like it's really ironic. So coaching, as somebody wrote famously, sort of started as this sort of Wild West where anything went. And it still has some of that. And then there was this flurry for a while of trying to make coaching an evidence-based practice and getting all this academic piece in there, which is wonderful. I contributed to a lot of that. And now I feel like it's gone back to sort of the Wild West in that coaching's everywhere and everyone's a coach now, and it starts to mean something and nothing. And so for me, I just feel like coach is a language that helps us to understand what we're doing, and it helps us be recognized by others who might want to buy our services. But again, though, it's to not conflate the word with our identity or our boundaries. So my only interest is to serve the client's need. And as people that have been in my programs will attest, in a given session, I might wear 10 different hats, only one of which is a coach, because they might need a touch around grief. They might need some strategy. They might need a friend. They might need another man to talk about their struggles as a man. And so for me, coaching provides then a container in which we can offer our best self. And to your point, Colin, I feel like we're entering into a very precarious time in human history, where if we just sit back and say, I'm just going to be a coach and wait for people to come to me for coaching, I think we'll be surprised at how insufficient that will become. And so what we're really about, and what the talk was about, was freeing ourselves to not wait anymore to, I have to take 3 more classes, then I'll be ready, or I need this certification, then I'll be ready, or that. And just to realize we need now to kind of reinvent our practices for the time that's coming, or the time that even is now. And so ICF has its own mission, its own purpose. It's not mine, but it serves what it does well. And for me, the future of the work is not there. Yeah. So let me just talk about, maybe I can connect together inner healer and individuals and ecosystems. One of the historical sort of accidents, if you will, in the formation of coaching was that it was dominated pretty exclusively by psychologists or psychology, and to some degree by leadership development folks and others, which was great. It's all coaching psychology was a great thing, and it was a huge anchoring for coaching. And for me, my first degree was in sociology, which was utterly useless as a career path, but phenomenal as a foundation for everything that I do. And so I can't not see systems. And so for me, a lot of what coaching misses is an attention to the sociological, anthropological, cultural aspects of the worlds in which we coach. And so for me, having come up through OD, through large-scale change projects, I just saw the realities of what it actually took for people to change. And then I married that with my background as a grief counselor and began to see that we put so much onus on the individual in our coaching, not fully appreciating the context that they operate in, and not helping them to understand how they could improve the ecosystems in which they work to make it easier for them to be at their best. And so for me, even if you don't want to get involved in the systemic space, having that frame just feels really essential. One of the sort of Western notions we've exported to other countries through coaching is the what's the word? The sort of celebrating the individual as the epitome of everything, and so the whole collective focus that you'd find in indigenous populations and other cultures is often lost in coaching. And we talk about team coaching, but that's just individual coaching with a group of people, in a way, in terms of its psychology. And so there's something about a collective consciousness that I think is essential for us to help our clients make the most of their work with us. Yeah. And then for me, as part of that, we are part of those ecosystems as well. And one of the, I always laugh with the students. If I think back about the most prevalent feedback or most common feedback I've given when I've done live programs with coaches is inviting them to stop coaching and pay attention to the person that's actually in front of them. And as part of that, there's an assumption. I mean, I don't believe the cliche that the clients have all the answers, otherwise they wouldn't be talking to us. But I do believe that the capacity to heal themselves is always present in them. So this idea of an inner healer, there, even for the most pedantic or pedestrian of coaching topics, there's pretty much inevitably some aspect of healing that needs to occur for the person to be able to act on whatever it is they're discovering in coaching. And we don't have to spend a lot of our time there. It's not our main primary job, but I think it's not helpful to think about we can just have these conversations and people will be better or do better. Where, especially now, where most people live, having been through this time, is in a very different place in which their inner healers need lots of attention. Otherwise, the rest of it, there's no scaffolding for them to be able to do what they've set out to do in coaching. Yeah, and so for me, I'm just trying to help them find that inner healer in themselves and help them have enough experiences so that my primary job is to get myself out of a job. I don't want them to need me. And I, like all of us, I went through this egoic phase where I loved that people needed me, and now I'm in a phase where that's the last thing I want. So yeah. So Carolyn, do you want to say more about what you wrote in the chat box?
Yeah.
I'm just remembering, David, a moment that rocked my world. You know, the way these things can happen in the moment, when you just made it super, super clear that I was not the healer. And it was like this, it was just like something really crashed around me. And it was partly a huge sense of relief. So the out-breath, it was a huge sigh of relief. And it was an amazing opening of clarity, because I was, without realizing it, deluded into thinking that I was in some way in that energy with clients. And I tend to get a lot of clients in big trauma and all kinds of stuff. And everybody does. It was just more overtly clear to me, perhaps, than some of my colleagues who are coaches. So it was just a really crashing moment, and it just brought up, as you went on to say, and we all talked about in our group, brings up the issue of the wounded healer. Heal thyself. That where is the responsibility? What are the ethics of being in any kind of healing field in which healing is called for, and a field in which healing might happen? It's probably going to happen if we do a lot less of what we think would be a really good idea. So that's what I'd like to say.
Yeah, my second most common piece of feedback is stop trying to be helpful.
Yeah, no.
So I'm going to stop. Thank you, Carolyn. And so I'm just going to stop there and see if there's any other reflections or observations you've made in these spaces, and then we'll talk about a couple other things that were raised about scaffolding in particular. What comes up for you when we say these things? Yeah,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Every time any one of you speaks, I do sigh because everything you're saying connects to my heart. So thank you. My challenge is I have the honor of supporting a lot of C-suite people, and that when they come to me, at least initially, it's because they think they need leadership development or strategy or something that is very skills development oriented. And so I guess I ask you how you've successfully, and we talk a lot about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. We have all these kind of conversations that I hope helps open them up. But I guess my question is, how do I, if I'm operating from my heart, reach their heart if they don't come to me in that space?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy. So one of the ways I've done that over the years, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so, is that often when leaders come, they're bringing their leader persona to the session, and they want to be polished up so their persona is shinier or more successful or more whatever, which I totally understand because they've got to compete in that space. So, you know, it's most of us ironically would end up doing exactly the same. And so one of the things I decided, and the ID students on the call will recognize this, I stopped teaching skills. I stopped teaching in MBA programs. I stopped running leadership programs. I found them an expensive, not very useful way to spend my time. And it's because they were trying to tack on new skills to old selves and old stories. And sometimes it would stick, but after a while the pins would get a bit annoying and they'd pull them out and then they'd go back to their old habits. So one of the ways I got to be able to invite them to come from a different place was to stop pretending that their eloquent participation in a leadership program would translate into change. And so what we would do often instead is to get them engaged in something that they would have to be doing in their job anyways. So the simplest example would be, I used to teach these leadership communication programs for all kinds of people in schools, and I stopped because people would say at the end, after we'd slaved for 3 months to build this multi-million-dollar program or whatever, oh, I got a few good tips, and I thought I just wanted to kill myself. And I thought, you could buy me a beer, and in 20 minutes I could give you the tips, and we could go home. Like, why are we wasting our time doing all of this and pretending that it's learning? And so we would create programs in which they had to bring a slide deck that they were going to have to present. And then we would transform the faculty into coaches. We would get rid of 95+% of the curriculum. And we would just workshop with them using a very simple narrative frame, how they might communicate differently. But along the way, that when they would protest, oh, I have to have this slide in there, we would say, why? And then they would explain why, and then they start to realize it's a bogus reason. It's around their own anxiety management, it's around their own personas, buffing, it's whatever. And the essence of the conversation over a day might be, what are you actually really trying to say? And can you stand behind that and say that with full integrity and a full heart? And oftentimes they couldn't. They realized it was corporate bullshit or whatever. And so the inquiry of using which we do a lot in our work, using the object of the slide deck as a projective device for them to see themselves. Oh, this is who I've become. Some like shill for whatever, or some or whatever that they end up being. And so rather than teach them, here's 10 steps to communicate better, or all that fancy language that we find interesting and most of our clients find not very useful in the end, because it doesn't translate into their environment well. So I want to get them engaged in real activities where they have to just show up as Bob or Rachel or whoever, whatever their name is. And then we can use that, especially if they've got a sort of like a child would have a toy, something that we can work with. They can see themselves outside of themselves and start to then see that, oh, wow, okay, that's why I'm talking. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't like questions because then I feel vulnerable. So I'm gonna obliterate them with 50 slides. And then there's no time for them to ask me any questions. Really? So what happens for you when people ask you questions? And then all these little openings appear in the cracks of this process that they're in. And that's where the real work happens. And the beauty of that, you could have, which I've done many times, you could have 30 people in that same workshop for the same reason and have 30 different learning agendas. And the vast majority of which would be untouched by any curriculum that I would ever create. And so we then move to real-time development based on emergent opportunities for people while they're working on something that actually matters.
Rachel is building on this conversation. Rachel, would you like to say some more?
Yes, hello. It was really just hi. So I've been doing a little training in somatic parts work recently with an amazing woman, and I just thought it was a really interesting comment when she was talking about protective parts and how we have managers and firefighters and they're protecting our exiled little children that we've hidden away inside us. But her point was that a lot of skills training, what passes for skills training in corporations, schools, institutions, is just strengthening existing managers. And those managers, you know, that as in manager parts, which are quite often childlike parts, you know, that they should have no place in business or society, really, if we're sort of thinking about becoming more integrated, more whole moving forward, and being able to access leadership states of being calm, curious, collected, all the rest of it. So it really struck me when she said that. Yeah, that there's something rigid and backward looking sometimes in that skills outlook. It's also just making me think, just generally, this conversation and your comments about, you know, coming through the past couple of years. I know we've had this conversations many times, but I myself become increasingly blurred on the distinction between coaching and therapy at times, and this sort of rigid, ridiculous line that cannot exist in reality, and this silly way we have of thinking that coaching should be like we bring our rational selves to coaching and our emotional selves have to go to therapy, which seems somehow part of this conversation. That was what I was thinking.
Yeah. I had fun when my daughter was in therapy for a while. I had fun teaching some basic coaching skills to her therapist who loved it. Again, she works mostly with kids, and she said kids are really practical. They don't want to talk about all these things, you know, they want to do stuff, you know, and want to figure things out. And so the coaching was very helpful to her that way. But thank you, Rachel. Yeah, and I do feel like it's, you know, the quest is how do we stay in integrity with ourselves and yet not feel beholden to stay inside the box.
Carol's brought up some other parts, which I think are pretty exciting to release in our clients. Carol, would you like to share some more?
Sure. Apologies for not being on video. It's just not a good day for that. Nice to have met you last week in New York, David.
Yeah.
And I also would put myself into the same, I don't know whether to call it category or grouping or whatever, that I can't not see systems either. And I think that comes from having studied linguistics long, long ago when I was an undergraduate, because we would always look at these examples of languages that we didn't understand, but we could see how they changed either the phonetic sounds or the type of language people used in different settings. So that gave a systems orientation to things for me that I still use. And so I think sometimes our clients sometimes they overestimate their sense of agency, that they are acting rationally within their organizations, yet they are very much influenced by who sits next to them at a meeting or who else is on the call, and whether someone said hello to them in the hallway. Obviously, I'm using examples of when we used to be in offices. So sometimes just there have been a number of times that clients have found that helpful to pay more attention to that. And the part of discovering your inner scientist in the work that I've been doing is about setting up experiments that can disprove some assumptions you've been holding and disprove some ways of thinking. And often, maybe like your example, David, of kids, that let's do stuff. There's only so much thinking and talking we can do about stuff. Why don't we, what are some small experiments to get started with? And what new insights do those yield that make you up for an even bigger experiment or really rethinking things?
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, there was a guy named Bob Pike who back in the day was one of the sort of pioneers in the training space. And he used to always say that adults were just children with big bodies.
Yeah.
And I think back, you think to your point, Carol, about how much have we actually really changed since we were kids? And are we still fighting some of the same fights or trying to work through some of the same issues we had when we were quite young? And a lot of when we, as you said, and I'm the same way, when we create these experiments for people, to kind of just bring their whole self to this as opposed to the performative self, and can get at some of those issues.
I think Carolyn has described, at least for me, the survivor self in needing to collect those skills. It sounds like we've got a lot of people resonating with this conversation, indeed. So.
All right, let me just respond to the other question that was raised, and then we'll see what else might be on your mind, because it relates to what we just talked about. And you're asking about scaffolding. So, that my next book will be out early next year on our new work in integrative development. And one of the core building blocks was the work of a guy named Lev Vygotsky, who was a very famous child psychologist and educator. Matter of fact, ironically, many of the sources in the book are about children. And I think the distinction between children and adults is not as great as we think. But in there, he talks about what he was most famous for, which were called zones of proximal development, which, like most great ideas, we've kind of butchered over the years. But so it doesn't really, it doesn't mean what we think it means. One of his basic premises is that, and if you've had young children or been around young children, you would recognize this, that they're always sort of falling forward. They're always trying to do the next thing. And so we're they're instinctively, because they have a long infancy compared to other species, they have to kind of move on quickly to kind of get things going. But he talks a lot about how a zone is something that a child is almost capable of doing on their own, but not quite. So this might be an infant who can't stand totally on their own, but they can stand if they're holding on to something. So that arm of the chair, or your leg or whatever becomes the scaffolding they need to actually experience standing up. And then pretty soon they let go, and then pretty soon they're walking, and then pretty soon they're running away. But so this notion of, one of my observations going back to, Lisa, what you were sharing in the beginning, is that there's, as an adult in the workplace, there's no place to practice. There's no place to try anything new. You're always on show. And even in a workshop, you're always on show. And so for me, I started to realize that when, even for the industrious ones who really do want to grow, what they don't have is a safe place to practice. And so when I realized, and if you've been around, say, executives for a while, and many of them have been to legions of programs, if you were to ask them, have you actually become a different person because of these programs? Most of them would tell you no. That just getting older, a bit wiser, a bit whatever. And I think a lot of it's because they keep ingesting lots of things through training and coaching and speaking, but they don't have any opportunity to digest, to integrate, to experiment. And so for me, it's because there's no scaffolding for them to do so. So in our programs and in the way that I do coaching, it's all about safe places to practice. It's all about, I don't think I've ever set a goal in 25 years to the client, and I never will. I'll support them if they have them, if that's important to them, but I won't set them because a goal is for later. If you can't do it now with me, the most informed, supportive person in your life right now, you're not going to do it later when the pressure's on. And I want you to be able to start to experience some of your own edges by practicing or trying something now. So that might be standing on top of a desk. It might be raising your voice. It might be sitting down. It might be shutting up. It might be, who knows what it might be. And humans, we're always subconsciously referencing ourselves as we move through the day. And so if someone has no anchor in themselves of the part of themselves, going back to the earlier point from Rachel, if they have no access to the parts of themselves they need to access, they're not going to access it. If they've never felt confident in their whole life, or they've been told they're not enough, and they all of a sudden need to be confident, they can't just suddenly become confident. And going to a training about confidence isn't going to help them because they have nothing in themselves to, well, this is what the confident me feels like, or acts like, or wants to do. And so we're trying to help people build up this internal resourcing and anchoring of the selves and the stories that they're going to need to accomplish what it is they said they wanted to accomplish, for example, in coaching. So the scaffolding, sometimes it's scaffolding like on the side of a building where we sort of just come alongside them and we support them as they're taking some steps. Sometimes it's more of a nurturing scaffolding where they just need somebody to talk about their exhaustion or their frustration or their loss or whatever. And sometimes it's what we think of as convex scaffolding. It pushes out against them, it challenges them. It's really about, and it goes again back to, as I've gotten older and hopefully wiser in this whole domain, I've started to realize that for me, the primary variable is, what is this person ready for right now? And nothing else interests me in the session, because it doesn't matter how excited they are by what we're talking about if they're not ready to do anything about it. So I'm not interested, and it doesn't even matter how big or small it is, but I'm really curious about, what is this person ready for, that with a little bit of scaffolding from me, they could step into a new space for themselves. And so everything becomes like alchemy and improv, which means it's very hard to create a curriculum or an agenda when you're working like this. These are rules of engagement and commitments to each other. And so the scaffolding becomes something that, rather than, as somebody was asking earlier about ratcheting up to the next rung of the ladder, what do I actually need more laterally to support myself as a coach or to support my client to kind of step into a new part of themselves or a new way of being in the world. And so that's what we do.
Here's an interesting thought. If we take Indy's observation of people being lonely at work and combine it with Bradley's note of not feeling the attribution or the acknowledgement of success, and combine those.
Okay.
And so you give your clients that permission to notice and to share with the person who might be sitting there and say, hey, that was a great job. And so it's a benefit to both. And so it's that sense of alchemy, I think, is really pretty powerful there. And then Carol's got a great question about the attention of psychological safety at work, and how does that change? Does it change? What does it mean? Any thoughts, David?
No. Yeah, so for me, I think sometimes we, maybe this is me being a bit cynical, but it's probably possible. But I think sometimes we deceive ourselves by using these kind of words. And then we do workshops on the words about psychological safety. But my only interest in do people feel more psychologically safe? Like, I've been in places in my life before I even knew that phrase where I felt very psychologically safe, but I wouldn't have known to say it that way. I was more interested in the quality of the relationship that allowed me to feel safe. We've all been in relationships or situations where we didn't feel psychologically safe, but didn't. So I look at the framing of that and all the wonderful work that's being done about its characteristics as important. They're important to understand what creates safety or what enables people to feel safe. And for me, that's about 20% of the journey. The other 80% is how do we actually need to behave and relate and communicate and build so that psychological safety is an inherent feature of what we're doing. Yeah, Lisa.
May I ask a related question? Something you touched on early on about the systemic nature of what we do with the people who trust us. I don't know if it was you who said in your presentation that a transformed person sent back out into the same system is likely to eventually revert. So how in your work do you, when you're providing the scaffolding for this person or people, how do you help them go back into a system that may or may not have changed in a way that is transformative for both?
Yeah. So I want to make a clarification, if that's what, and I think somebody was asking this in the chat box as well. So I'm not providing the scaffolding. I do sometimes, but we're seeking scaffolding for them, or they're helping them find scaffolding for themselves. Sometimes that's from me, like in that moment in time, I might do something to create a stronger container so they feel safe to talk about something. I might, there's a variety of things we can do to like notice something that's trying to arise in them, but they're not quite sure they feel comfortable sharing it. We can sort of lean in maybe a bit and create more of a bit of safety. And more, it's just like supporting them to get the scaffolding that they need. So I have no control over the organizations in which people work, even if the organization is my client. It's not my responsibility in a way. What I'm trying to do is help people be conscious and to feel agentic, to be able to make that space as good as possible for them and others. And sometimes when we get enough of those people, we actually can affect improvement in the culture. Oftentimes it means people leave because they realize like there's no space for me here. The problem is that I'm not sure that there's a lot of spaces for the nature. Well, this is longer. I feel like I'm veering quickly off into massive digression. So I'm going to stop that and say, I want to invite people to decide how much energy they want to spend on things outside themselves. And so when we did a lot of bigger culture change projects, we would invite people to look around them at the parts of the business they were in and ask themselves, are the systems that we've created making it easier or harder for us to be our best selves? And then to the degree that was possible, could you address the things that made your life more difficult for you or for your customers or clients or whatever you were serving? The digression, I'll just name the digression in a sentence. I think the way that our economic system is set up now makes that really difficult. But I think for me, it's like, well, another massive digression we could take here too. So, and I was going to show this later, but I can share it now. So I have a daughter who's 20, and when she was near the end of high school, she decided to do a gap year in high school in the UK. And I've spent a lot of time in Europe and actually would have moved there if it had not been for the pandemic. But one of the things that she was really appreciating it was she said, I feel like even though I'm not from here, I fit here better because there's more of a sense of the we than I find in the States. And so when she was leaving to go again back to Europe, I remember having some time with her and her friends, and she was saying goodbye. And I realized in that moment that the purpose of my business was no longer myself or my clients, it was her and her friends. So I feel like we're in this in-between time as a species. We may or may not fare well in this in-between time, but it's really clear, the pandemic's made really clear that we can't continue with the world we've built. It's just not viable. So, and so I'm planting seeds for trees under which I'll never live long enough to sit, to create what's coming for the people that are younger than I am, and particularly for people of her generation. And part of that's to reimagine what it means to work. And for now, I just help my clients to figure out what can you do that makes this a better place for the people around you. And then frankly, I don't know if the projects I did 10 years ago would even work now, given the world that we live in. I'm not sure. I don't do them that way anymore, but yeah, I just feel like we need to, if nothing else, if in coaching, we need to be mindful of what is the world into which this person is returning, and are they prepared for what they're going back into? And coaches don't spend any time talking about that very much, and I think that's a shame. What do you think, Lisa?
I think that sounds really elegant. I'm just not sure, honestly, if I'm being frank, how realistic, quick, whatever word you want to use. I mean, again, I want to see what you're describing. The headwinds are really, really, really strong.
Yes, that was my digression. I would agree with you. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure if all the projects I did for years and years and years would work now. I think we've created conditions that make that really difficult. And so for me, I thought, well, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to stop. So what can I do? So part of why I developed integrative development was I said, I don't know what's coming. I don't know what the answer is. There is no magic solution. I just know that we're going to need practitioners that are very different than the practitioners we have now. The skills that many of us were trained in, raised with, taught are inadequate for this time. And part of that means stepping outside of our professional boundaries, going back to ICF. You know, for all the great things ICF does, it's so far out of touch with the world that we actually live in. And so
Can I just say, after this conversation, I'm completely out of that loop. I'm not doing anything. I'm so really done. I've been stressing over that for a week, but thank you.
Yeah, please,
I'm done now.
go forth and prosper, and you don't need that anymore.
Thank you.
No, I feel like, and that's, again, in sharing a bit more about a little bit later about what we do. I just want to hang out with cool, smart people to figure out what are we going to do instead. So it's way more interesting to me than trying to provide more information. Yeah.
And I'd just like to acknowledge, and
Stephanie.
apologies if I say this wrong, Pamela, her notion of psychological safety as a word that helped her sit in what she's experiencing. So
Great.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, Tanya's acknowledging what you're sharing as well. Thank you all.
Just realized we have two screens of people. So, are there what else is anything else on your mind from the talk, or anything else this has stirred up for you you'd like to share or ask?
Mrs. David, I'd just like to share. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Please, I can wait.
No, absolutely go. Absolutely, please.
Maybe a question related to coaching organizations, because we started with ICF and we almost ended with ICF. So my question was, are there any other coaching organizations that are more aligned with your work, David?
That's a dangerous question. Yeah, yes and no. I mean, so part of it is just, I would say no. Again, but that's fine, because I think there's some that are better at what they do than ICF. And I just look at this, over the years, my work has become probably closest to Taoism, and where we pay more attention to what is than what should be, and so I look at systems create what they need, and so coaches needed these organizations and they fulfill that role. So I don't spend a lot of time trying to change ICF or lament ICF. It serves a role for certain people and actually provides a clear mirror about what I don't want for myself. So I'm grateful for that. And I think some of the associations do a more rigorous job to elevate coaching. And I just realized those things are, I've spoken at many of their conferences, I've written for many of their journals, and I will continue to do so, because it makes the world in coaching a better place if they do their jobs well. I guess my invitation is to recognize, just to notice what they don't do and what needs to be done by others, which is not, and in some ways not being done. And so, like, if I had my magic wand, I would, I don't find most conferences as valuable maybe as they once were. I'd rather just sit in a room and have a beer and just talk openly and honestly with other practitioners about the reality of our practices and our clients and the world. And I feel like, again, just to let things be what they are, and find, just for all of us to seek value where we can find value. There's no need to put anybody down, really, or they just do what they do and they serve the people for whom that's an important need, and it's great. The world would be a huge loss if ICF went away. And it could also be true that you don't choose to pursue that path. And so I'm all for recognizing other things that we need that we don't have, and how could we go create them. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is, how could we contribute well, I'm a beginner, maybe I'm not able to contribute too much right now, but how can we create a different international organizations that will bring into the world what you have in mind, David? In the world of coaching, to amplify your work and your message.
Yeah, thank you. So if you've consulted long enough, you realize that organizations tend to follow traditions, very typical paths. So I would say it's probably not an organization at all. Organizations tend to often move to places that make it sometimes farther away from where they started, just by the very nature of becoming an organization. So what we're trying to do for ourselves through the Institute is to create a community of connected people. So I think it's more a different metaphor. It's not an organization which tends to be, yes, we're going to meet in the pub, Carolyn. Organizations tend to just by nature evolve to become bureaucracies. That's just what they do. And, and so I'm not interested in the bureaucracy, because then we'll just become like everybody else. And 20 years from now, people complaining about David and his organization. I don't want that. I'll have to come back out of the grave and change that. But so I feel like it's, and one of the phrases we use from an author that I really like, talks about nimble pods. So I want to create nimble pods of connected practitioners who are aligned around some common purposes. They're not aligned around me. I'm not interested in that, but who are aligned about and connected to each other and committed to each other, which in itself is also not easy. But I feel like if we had a collection of hundreds of tree planters, that in time we'll discover what we actually have and what we actually need. And one of the big pieces of our work, which is again comes right out of the reality of dealing with change, is that most of this is completely unknown. I have no idea what the right thing to do is, or where this is going, or I just know that, my talk was really about, these are questions we need to ask ourselves, and we need to create spaces where people can share and explore. And so that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Carolyn's mention of metaphors is a very powerful experience.
Other thoughts for right now? Yeah, Bradley.
I was just curious how much you think that your current perspective is really just a result of aging and development and sort of working in these generative challenge spaces. So, we always hear, the world changes in generations, and some of my training back in the day from personality psychologists are like, well, it's just you developing into a different age in your life. So I'm just curious how much of your thinking is at this level of expertise and everything you've seen, you're just ready for this, this is your zone currently.
So my best friend has always told me that I was born backwards. He said, you were born a grandparent. and I firmly believed for quite some time that I never quite easily fit in my decade. I said, but when I'm in my 60s, I'm going to shine. It's going to be my time. And it's true. It's the best time of my life. My knees are a bit sore and whatnot, but it's the best time. And so, and to your point, in all candor, Bradley, I've started to realize that some of what I teach now, I've been around people like this all my life, but so how much of this would I fully have understood when I was in my 40s? Probably not as much as I understand now. And so that's why I'm not interested in starting an ism or anything, because that's really a reflection of me at my stage in my own life and practice. And so I'm trying to decenter myself to let the work and the invitations be there. So for other generations to take up and do what they need to do, because what the world you inherit when you're in your 60s, Bradley, is different than the one I'm in right now. I'm not sure it may be better, maybe worse, I don't know, but it's going to be different. And you're going to be on a different journey for yourself between where you are now and where I am now. And yeah, and so we're in, I'll put up a couple of slides in it to show you what we're doing, but we're moving away from a program-centric organization. And the programs will be embedded in communities of learning. And because I just realized for me, the world doesn't need any more programs. We could have a moratorium of programs for a year and we'd all be fine. We'd hyperventilate for a while and panic, and then we realize we're fine. What we need is more, for me anyways, is more intimacy, more candor, more bravery to create. And so I said, we need to move away from a traditional program-based institute to one that's very different, which is what we're doing as of last week. So yeah, so a lot of it's just getting older and paying attention. So I highly recommend getting older and paying attention. Yeah. Does that work for you, Bradley? All right. I'm gonna just, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna share my screen again for a bit and go just share a few things. So we've already done enough of this. So I actually have shared everything on the screen. So this is the mission of what we're about at the Institute now. Going back to your question or your observation, Lisa, about, you know, how much of this can we really impact? I have no idea. I don't really even care anymore, frankly. My job is, in this moment in time, can I help this person move forward and learn something? That's all I can do. And can I connect enough those dots together for that person where they evolve? Can I help them do the same for others so they can help their team or their family? The first year of the pandemic, we have a portfolio assignment in our programs to convene a circle to share what you're discovering with others. And it's part of the requirement for certification. And I would say 60% of the participants did this with their family to use this work as a way to help the family talk about how to adapt to the pandemic. And so for me, this is what I'm most curious about. All of our new work's about how do we accelerate learning in the moment? How do we help people pay attention to the potential in the moment to learn, even if it's learning that's not comfortable for them? And all the work that we do now is to teach our practitioners how to do that in various ways. So these are the three things that we do. We teach people narrative coaching, we teach people integrated development, and then the piece I want to share with you is sort of the bridge. We started our programs every January, but we've started a new thing in the lab, which is will become the foundation for everything that we do starting in January. And I'll share more about what that's about in a minute. And it really comes back to the fundamental question in my work is, what does this person need most right now? It's all I'm really interested in. What are they ready for? What are they needing? What would be generative for them? And so just to kind of ask yourself as you think about your own practice and your own life and, you know, kind of what is it that you need for yourself kind of moving forward. So these are three of the things that we spend a lot of time supporting people on. And so you'll notice here that there's nothing about more information. And it's not what people are asking for. I mean, we do provide lots of it. But people want to have more intimacy. They want to be able to connect with other like-minded people. They want to be able to integrate everything that they've developed over time and learned, particularly in the pandemic, and hone that to deepen their mastery of what it is they want to do. And people want to create. We're in a maker economy, right? So people want to incubate, to collaborate, to bring something to life that makes the world a better place and expresses their unique gift. to the world, and so that's where we want to spend time. And so for me, we've just coming back to one of our other famous phrases. The lab is really about helping people to do that and help people to be able to stand in the moment and help make things happen. This was the slide that we had in our talk. Just again, I believe that we're in this really ripe opening for new innovations in our spaces. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. And none of us are ever ready. None of us are ever going to know enough. There's no one to grant us permission. And the people that want to grant us permission, we don't want their permission. We don't need their permission. And we're never going to be perfect at this. But for me, we just need to get started. And that's what we're trying to do. So we put together this really cool thing. And we started it at the beginning of June. We've got a couple more free open houses to come explore. It's a platform that's going to be co-created by the participants, where we're going to provide the space and resources. Eventually our programs will be housed there so that students and graduates can talk to each other and partner. We've got all kinds of cool online forums and pieces. But really, if you were to ask me what the lab will look like in a year, I have no idea, because it's not going to be my lab. It's going to be the lab where our work is housed. But going back to, is it LibView? How do you pronounce your first name?
LibView. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So it's what you were asking for in terms of what is the future of this. I don't know exactly. I've got my ideas, but for us, it's going to be through the lab, so that we practice what we preach and we let people find their own way to get what they need from being with us. And so for me, it's a great opportunity for us to begin to explore how do we build a different future and create some accountability for each other, some structures to support each other. And for me, it's where I'm going to spend most of my time starting next year. We've got an amazing faculty that will start teaching more and more of our programs to give me time to play in the lab and support the people that want to kind of do new things. And so again, the way we've set this up is that we're just going to do a pilot for the bulk of the rest of the year, just to kind of get people on board to participate. We've got some open houses. You can go to the website and join one of our free open houses, kind of see it for yourself, explore, see if that's for you. But for me, I feel like for me, it's the future. It's what we've been building for the last 3 years through a various series of experiments. Yeah, I think it's an amazing thing we're starting. So for me, I just want to thank you for your time. We've got we've got 15 more minutes. Happy to answer any more questions about the lab, anything that we've brought up today. I love this photo. We found this some years ago, and it sort of is emblematic of what we're trying to do, which is just stand there and we've got the whole universe in front of us, and we just put our boots there and say, we're going to go see what we can make happen. All right. So I'm just going to take this back down now that I've shared that with you and see what else you'd like to ask or to share while we have some time together. And maybe people.
I'll dare ask another question, please. For someone
you can ask as many as you'd like.
who is new here, I only got to know your work about a week ago when you gave a presentation. I may have read something in the past, but at that time I didn't remember. So for me, this is something relatively new. And I'm not even qualified as a coach yet. I have just started the coaching program. So from someone who is in this, let's say, state at the beginning of a journey, which of your courses would be more suitable to take when I finish the one that I've already started?
Yeah. So the lab is a space for visitors, for beginners, for students, for graduates to just be immersed in the work that we do without having to commit to a program. So that might be a nice adjunct to what you're doing now, to be in this community and exposed to the work. When it comes time to take a program, the main distinction is both narrative coaching and integrative development, and we may bring back a third program that we trialed last year, which the main difference is what you want to do. So the narrative coaching program is the one I'm most well known for. It's primarily for people that primarily do coaching for a living. ID is for people that do coaching among other things, and it's the learning and development theory and the approach that I've used to solve global IT problems with big companies, all the way down to how do I become a better parent. It allows you to scale the work in any situation, and so we have a lot of consultants, a lot of facilitators, leadership development people who are using this to begin to approach their client dilemmas very differently. So for me, for you, I would say narrative coaching is probably the place to begin. You can do that either in January or the following January, but in the meantime, the lab is a way just to be in the work without having to commit to a big program.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
David, I wondered in this new lab, how much cross-fertilization is taking place or was envisioned between the narrative coaching and the ID participants?
Yeah, so there will be both. So a lot of this will be determined by people arrive. There will be spaces for graduates or participants in specific programs to talk with others in their program. And a lot of the opportunities and the spaces will be around topics or skills or questions that your background doesn't matter at all. You could be not having studied either of them, but you're just really curious about this way of thinking. And so for me, it's one of the tenets of particularly of ID is that, and why I stopped creating curriculums. Like, I mean, I don't mean this as, it may sound more adverse than I really mean it, but it's sort of the arrogance that we are asked to decide what somebody else is supposed to learn. And for me, maybe it's going back to Bradley's hypotheses. It may just be a reflection of my own stubbornness. My mentor when I was in college said, when you care about something, you're by far my best student. When you don't care about something, you're a pain in the ass. That's a direct quote. And so for me, what I've learned over the years is that everybody's on their own journey. And I spent so much time over the years that I now lament building the perfect curriculum. And I made some crappy curriculums, and they both had kind of the same impact. And so a lot of it has to do with, why do I assume, or why do my clients assume that my knowledge is going to be useful to somebody else, and that I should decide what that's going to look like and what that's going to include. And so I've just jettisoned all that. And so for me, that shows up in the lab of everything will be there as a resource, and the people will decide what they need and how they need it, and they'll band together to create it, find it, whatever. Yeah, so it's completely repurposing what I know in ways that I think are more useful to people. Yeah. Any other final thoughts for the day? All right. So what I would appreciate, and you're welcome to put this in the chat box, but I would appreciate hearing from you, like what sparked something in you in all of this, either, and what are you taking with you today that feels meaningful to you? Again, if you want to share out loud, if you're more of a verbal type, you can do that, or you're welcome just to write something in the chat box as a reflection for yourself. So we'll just take a couple of minutes and see what emerges there, and then we'll call it a day or a night.
So if it's not too distracting for everyone, one of the things that I'm personally interested in from a lab experience is the work that I've been doing is in group. And it's how do we, if we think about learning and how children learn in a social environment, how can we bring that into a corporate environment? And it's a crafting psychological safety or trust as a group, and then letting that permeate. And it's the experience of, I see you and your perspectives. They're different than mine, but they're okay. And so that's the conversation that I would love to have with people in the lab. Colin, yes.
Just to build on that, it's almost, David, when you said about the curriculum, it came back to me. It's almost going back to the Montessori of coaching for adults. You know, each one we have to learn at different paces, at different things. Some do it orally, some need to do it physically, kinetically. And that's what vibrated for me.
Yeah, Maria makes a good showing in my book. So, yeah.
Debbie.
David and I were just at a conference in New York, and companies that have very large armies of coaches can go into organizations and coach 1,000 people. And that was talked about as a way to help an organization really transform. And no, I wonder if it can really have that effect, how if across all of those thousands of coaching engagements, if there's some sharing about what the system is, what the system could be. It's a big intervention, and I'm not sure yet if we have the data on whether it really does impact the organizational system.
It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm enjoying reading the things in the chat box.
Yeah, yes. This is Debbie. I love that idea of looking for what we don't have and finding a way to create it. What we've been doing all along isn't working anymore. I see that with I have a 22-year-old daughter, and the way I grew up and the way I worked isn't working. And it wasn't work for them in their lifestyle. And it honestly doesn't work for me either, because I left corporate America. So it's trying to find that and create that space, and that idea of creating for myself and my kids and my clients is just really empowering, I think.
Wonderful.
Lots of amazing thoughts in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie, for helping to host this with us. I really appreciate it. It's always good to see you, and for all of you who came. I just feel like we're, well, some of this may seem a bit cynical. For me, it's just sort of the wisdom of being older and really paradoxically more courageous now to just really take everything that we've done, that we all know together, and recognize that many of the institutions upon which we once relied, education, democracy, healthcare, are under duress. And to be able to figure out how we can use what we know to create some different avenues for our clients to thrive in a world that's can be challenging at times, and to remember all the good things that we're bringing. So I just really appreciate your time and glad you came to join us. And it's really heartening to read what's in the chat box. And we'll post this video on the website once we get it all fixed up. And so you're more than welcome to share that with others if you'd like. I just want to thank you for the time and for your interest in being on this journey. So thank you.